Elvis and the Mafia? The dangerous connection that almost killed him? Las Vegas, Nevada, August 23, 1973, 3 a.m. The silence of the Hilton International Presidential Suite is broken by the sound of a bottle shattering against the Italian marble. Elvis Aaron Presley, the man who made the whole world move with his hips, stands before a gilded mirror, his face covered in cold sweat, his hands trembling uncontrollably. It's not the alcohol. It's not the exhaustion of yet another sold-out performance. It's fear. An ancestral, primal fear that tears at his guts like a rusty blade. On the nightstand, a white envelope with no return address. Inside, a photo of him leaving the stage that same night, and a single word written in red ink that looks like blood. Thursday. He knows what that means. Thursday. 2 days from now. The deadline is running out. Elvis closes his eyes and whispers a prayer his mother taught him when he was still a poor boy from Tupelo, Mississippi. But the words won't come. Only silence. And in that silence, a question no one would ask about the King of Rock. How did the most famous man in the world become a hostage of the Mafia? And why did they want him dead? Before we continue, let me tell you something important. This is not just the story of a singer. It is the story of a man who achieved everything humanity considers success and discovered, in the most brutal way possible, that the price of glory can be your very soul. It's about choices, about loyalty, about the moment you realize that the people who promised to protect you are the same ones pointing the gun at your head. If stories like this, real stories of real people who faced the impossible, touch your heart as they touch mine, please consider subscribing to this channel, because I believe every life has lessons that can illuminate our own journey. And the story of Elvis and the Mafia is one of those lessons you will never forget. Now, let's go back in time, because to understand why Elvis was receiving death threats in 1973, we need to go back much further. We need to go back to when he was still just a boy with an impossible dream.
Tupelo, Mississippi, 1935. A two-room house that looks more like a wooden crate nailed together with faith. Gladys Presley gives birth to twins, but only one survives. Elvis grows up knowing he should have been two, but fate chose for him to be alone. His mother tells him he has to live for two, be great for two, love for two. And Elvis believes her with every fiber of his childish being. They have nothing, absolutely nothing. His father, Vernon, is in and out of jail for petty crimes, fake checks, small thefts born of necessity. His mother works wherever they will take her calloused hands, and Elvis grows up wearing donated clothes, eating whatever they can scrape together, but always with music in his heart. He listens to gospel at the First Assembly of God Pentecostal Church. He listens to blues on the streets of Shakerag, Tupelo's black neighborhood. He listens to country on the broken radio his father fixed with wire. And somewhere between those sounds, between those pains, between that poverty that bites like a snake, something new is born. Something the world doesn't know yet. Something that will change everything. In 1948, they moved to Memphis, Tennessee, seeking a better life, finding more of the same. Housing projects, thin walls, cockroaches, neighbors screaming all night. But Memphis has something Tupelo didn't have. Memphis has Sun Records. And in 1953, an 18-year-old Elvis with $19 in his pocket that he saved for months driving a truck walks into the small studio on Union Avenue to record a song for his mother. Sam Phillips, the owner, hears something in the voice of that shy boy with slicked back hair. Something dangerous, something new, something the white radio and the black radio never heard at the same time. And on July 5, 1954, Elvis Presley records That's All Right, and without knowing it, without understanding, without having the slightest idea of the hurricane he is about to unleash, he lights the fuse of a cultural revolution that will blow up the world. 1956. Elvis is no longer a housing project boy. He is a phenomenon. He is on television. He is in the movies. He is on the cover of every magazine. Teenagers faint when he moves his hips. Parents want to ban him. Pastors call him a demon. And the money starts pouring in. Not the money you and I know. The money that buys castles. The money that buys loyalty. The money that buys silence. And with that money, people arrive. People who want a piece. People who see in him not an artist, but a gold mine. And among those people, discreetly, silently, almost invisibly, appear the men in dark suits. The men with New York accents. The men with gold rings and Rolex watches. The men whose names never appear in the newspapers, but whose fingers control Las Vegas like a conductor controls an orchestra. The Mafia was watching the king. And when the Mafia sets its eyes on you, it's because it has already decided how much you are worth.
Understand one thing about Las Vegas in the 1950s and 1960s. It was not the sanitized corporate city you know today, with theme parks and Cirque du Soleil shows. It was a city literally built by the Mafia. The 5 families of New York, the Genovese family, the Gambino family, Lucchese, Bomano, Colombo, all had a stake in the Las Vegas casinos. The Flamingo, the Sands, the Desert Inn, the Riviera. Every one of these places was not just a hotel. It was a money laundering machine, a massive operation of corruption, extortion, illegal gambling, and bribery that generated millions of dirty dollars that needed to be cleaned. And entertainment was the perfect way to do it. You hire a famous artist, you pay him in cash, you declare less revenue than you actually had, you launder the money through the box office. Simple, efficient, invisible. And for this to work, you need artists who fill those rooms. Artists who make people fly from all over the country to Las Vegas. Artists like Frank Sinatra, like Dean Martin, like Sammy Davis Jr., and of course, like Elvis Presley. In 1956, Elvis gives his first performance in Las Vegas. It's a disaster. The audience, older, more accustomed to the smooth crooners and variety shows, doesn't know what to do with that boy who moves as if possessed. They boom him. They ignore him. Elvis leaves the stage humiliated and swears he will never return to Las Vegas. But Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, a man whose true identity was a mystery wrapped in lies, an illegal immigrant from Holland living under a false name, doesn't forget Las Vegas. Because Colonel Tom Parker understands something that Elvis, in his poor boy's naivete, doesn't understand. Las Vegas is not about art. Las Vegas is about money. And where there is money, there is power. And where there is power, there is opportunity. The Colonel begins holding meetings, discreet meetings, in the back rooms of casinos, with men whose handshakes are too firm and whose smiles never reach their eyes. Men like Morris Barney Dalitz, known as Mo Dalitz, one of the most powerful gangsters in the United States, who controlled the Desert Inn. Men like Meyer Lansky, the Mafia's financial genius, called the Mafia's accountant, who structured the entire Las Vegas operation. Men like Sam Giancana, head of the Chicago outfit, who had connections that ranged from the White House to the darkest alleys of Little Italy. And Colonel Tom Parker makes a deal he never fully tells Elvis about, a deal that ties Elvis's fate to the criminal underworld in a way that no fan, no biographer, no report has ever fully managed to unravel. The deal was simple. Elvis would return to Las Vegas. But not immediately. First, he would conquer Hollywood. First, he would make films that would transform his image from dangerous rebel into harmless romantic lead. First, he would serve in the army, clean up his reputation, become respectable in the eyes of conservative America. And then, When the time was perfect, when Elvis was not just a star, but an institution, he would return to Las Vegas. And when he returned, it would be for long residencies, months of performances, 2 shows a night, 7 days a week, filling the casinos, bringing in gamblers, generating millions. And a percentage of those millions, a percentage that would never appear in any official contract, would silently flow into the pockets of the men who truly controlled that city in the desert. 1969. The International Hotel, which would later become the Las Vegas Hilton, was being built. It would be the largest hotel in the world, 30 floors, 1,500 rooms, a showroom that seated 2,000 people, and they needed a star for the opening. A star who would justify the absurd grandeur of that palace of concrete and ambition. Colonel Tom Parker, now deeply in debt to the casinos due to his own gambling addiction, something he hid from Elvis as easily as he breathed, knew the time was right. It was time to bring Elvis back. And he negotiated. He negotiated a 4-week contract, 57 performances for $125,000, a fortune for the time. But what Elvis didn't know was that the contract had clauses that tied him down, clauses that said he could only perform in Las Vegas, nowhere else, clauses that automatically renewed, clauses that gave the hotel, and therefore the men behind the hotel, control over his career in a way few artists in history have ever experienced. And when Elvis went on that stage on July 31, 1969, wearing a white karate gi because he hadn't yet created the rhinestone jumpsuits that would become his trademark, something magical happened. He was no longer the boy from 1956 that the Las Vegas audience had rejected. He was a man with presence, a man with power, a man who had spent 8 years making mediocre films in Hollywood and was hungry to show the world that he was still the king. And he crushed it. He sang as if his life depended on it, as if every note was proof that he still mattered. And the audience, that very same Las Vegas audience that had scorned him, stood up and applauded until their hands hurt. Critics called it the greatest comeback in show business history.
But to Elvis, it didn't feel like a comeback. It felt like a prison, a beautiful, luxurious prison with red velvet curtains and crystal chandeliers, but a prison nonetheless. Because once you enter the orbit of Las Vegas, once you become part of the gears that keep those casinos running, you don't leave. Elvis began to notice this slowly. In the early years, it was glamorous. He had the Hilton Presidential Suite, 30 rooms, a full kitchen, a grand piano, a view of the whole city. He had everything he ever wanted when he was a poor boy in Tupelo. But he also began to notice things, strange things, things that didn't make sense, like the meetings Colonel Parker had with men Elvis never met, like the money that should be in his bank account but that the colonel claimed was invested in opportunities, like the security guards who showed up without him asking, security guards who didn't work for him, but who were always there, always watching, always reporting. Elvis began to ask questions. And when you start asking questions in Las Vegas, when you start poking the surface of a lake that looks calm but hides alligators, things start to change. 1971. Elvis is in his dressing room between performances. He is exhausted. He is doing 2 shows a night at 8 and midnight, 7 days a week with no break, no rest. His doctor, Dr. George Nicopolis, known as Dr. Nick, is giving him pills to wake up, pills to sleep, pills for energy, pills to calm down. Dexedrine, Placidil, Quaalude, Percodan. A pharmaceutical cocktail that is destroying his body from the inside out. And on this particular day, a man Elvis has never seen before enters his dressing room. He is Italian, 100% Italian. Black Armani suit, silk tie, gold ring with a red stone that looks like a ruby but is too big to be real. He sits down uninvited, lights a Cuban cigar, and says, "Elvis, you're a smart guy. You know how things work around here, don't you?" Elvis, still in his sweaty rhinestone jumpsuit from the performances, looks at the man and feels a chill down his spine. He grew up poor, but he didn't grow up stupid. He knows a mobster when he sees one. "Who are you, Elvis?" He smiles. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you're doing a very good job here. You're bringing in a lot of people, a lot of good people, people who spend money, a lot of money, and we appreciate that." Elvis feels his heart race. "We?" The man takes a drag on his cigar and slowly exhales the smoke. "You don't need to know the names. You just need to know there are expectations. You understand? Expectations." Elvis swallows hard. "What kind of expectations?" He stands up. "That you keep doing what you're doing. That you don't miss any performance. That you fill that showroom every night. And that you don't ask questions about things that are none of your business." He puts his hand on Elvis's shoulder, a gesture that could seem friendly, but which feels like a threat. "You're a good boy, Elvis. Keep being a good boy." And he leaves.
Elvis stands there, trembling. For the first time in his life, he truly understands where he is. He is not the king of anything. He is an employee, a very well-paid employee, but an employee nonetheless. And his employers are not people you negotiate with. They are people you obey, or you face the consequences. He calls Colonel Parker that night. "Colonel, who was that man in my dressing room?" The colonel, on the other end of the line, hesitates. And when Colonel Tom Parker hesitates, it's because he's calculating how much of the truth he can tell without completely destroying the illusion. "Elvis, you have to understand that Las Vegas is a complex city. There are people who have interests here, important people. And as long as you do your job, those people will protect you." "Protect me?" Elvis almost screams. "Protect me from what?" "From things you don't even want to know, my boy. Trust me. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep filling that showroom, and everything will be fine." But nothing was fine, because Elvis made the mistake you must never make when you are involved with the Mafia. He started thinking he was bigger than the system. 1972. Elvis is watching television in his Graceland mansion in Memphis during a rare period away from Las Vegas. And he sees a news report about the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. And something ignites in his mind. A crazy idea. An idea that in his naivete and his desperate desire to be seen as more than just a singer, as a true patriot, a true servant of his country, seems brilliant. He goes to Washington. He secures a meeting with President Richard Nixon. And in this meeting, which became one of the most iconic photographs in American history, Elvis offers himself as a federal agent. He tells the president that he can infiltrate the drug world, that he can help the government fight drug trafficking, that he has access to places and people that normal federal agents would never have. And Nixon, ever the politician, always looking for photo ops and ways to seem connected to the youth, gives him a badge, an official badge from the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And Elvis walks out of that Oval Office feeling as if he had just received the Medal of Honor. He doesn't realize he has just signed his own death warrant. Because the news spreads, not publicly, not in the newspapers, but in the places where it matters, in the places where men in dark rooms make decisions about who lives and who dies. The word spreads that Elvis Presley is now, at least nominally, a federal agent. And you have to understand what that means for the Mafia. To them, it doesn't matter if Elvis really intends to work against them. It doesn't matter if the badge is just a museum piece he keeps in a velvet case. What matters is the perception. What matters is that now there's the possibility that Elvis, who sees everything that happens behind the scenes in Las Vegas, who knows people, who hears conversations, might be an informant. And informants are not tolerated. Informants are eliminated.
Meyer Lansky, the old and astute financial architect of the Mafia, now in his final years but still immensely powerful, holds a meeting with his associates. "The singer is becoming a problem," he says. "He is asking questions. He is walking around with a federal badge. He is becoming unstable. One of the younger men, eager to prove his worth, suggests the obvious solution. Then we take care of him, like we took care of the others. Lansky slowly shakes his head. You don't kill Elvis Presley. You kill Elvis Presley and the FBI, the CIA, all the alphabet agencies are going to descend on us. He is too big. He is too visible. So what do? Lansky lights a cigarette. We send a message. We let him know that we know. We let him know that he needs to stay in line. And if he doesn't, then we consider more permanent options. And so the messages begin. At first, they are subtle. A security guard who should be at his post isn't there. A dressing room lock that was secured is suddenly open. Equipment that should be working mysteriously breaks minutes before a show. Elvis notices. How could he not notice? He starts becoming paranoid. He starts carrying guns, lots of guns. He always loved guns since he was a child, but now it's different. Now it's not a hobby. Now it's survival. He has a Beretta on his ankle, a Colt 45 on his hip, a Derringer in his pocket. He sleeps with an automatic pistol under his pillow. His friends, the group he calls the Memphis Mafia, although they have absolutely no connection to the real Mafia, start to worry. Elvis, man, you're going crazy, Red West, his childhood friend and bodyguard, tells him. No one is trying to kill you. You don't know, Elvis replies, his eyes red from sleepless nights and too many pills. You don't know what I know. You haven't seen what I've seen. Then tell me. But Elvis can't tell, because part of him still doesn't completely believe it. Part of him still thinks maybe it's the paranoia. Maybe it's the drugs. Maybe it's the exhaustion of years doing 2 shows a night without rest.
Until the envelope arrives. August 1973. The white envelope without a return address that we found at the beginning of this story. The photo of him leaving the stage. The word in red, Thursday. He knows it's not a coincidence. He knows it's not a joke. He knows because 2 days earlier, one of the sound technicians, a young Italian guy from New Jersey who was always nice to Elvis, pulled him aside and whispered, "You need to get out of town, man. You need to cancel the shows. You need to disappear for a while." "Why?" Elvis asked. The technician looked around nervously. "Because there are people who aren't happy with you. Big people. People who don't forgive." "Who?" The technician shook his head. "I've said too much already. Just get out of town, okay?" But Elvis can't leave town. He has a contract. He has 57 contracted performances. And more importantly, if he runs, if he shows fear, then they win. And Elvis Aaron Presley, the poor boy from Tupelo who became the king of rock and roll, is not used to letting anyone win. So what does he do? He picks up the phone and makes the most improbable call of his life. He calls J. Edgar Hoover. Well, not exactly Hoover because Hoover died in 1972, but the FBI. And he says he has information. Information about money laundering in Las Vegas. Information about who really controls the casinos. Information about extortion and corruption schemes. He doesn't have proof. He doesn't have documents. But he has names. And he is willing to talk. And the FBI, which had been trying to dismantle the Mafia's operations in Las Vegas for decades without much success, is suddenly very, very interested. They schedule a meeting. Thursday, the same day as the threat. And when Elvis realizes the coincidence, when he realizes that somehow they knew he was going to contact the authorities, he understands how deep the infiltration is. They have people everywhere. In the courts, in the police, maybe even in the FBI. There is no safe place. There is no one to trust.
Thursday, August 25, 1973, 9 o'clock in the morning. Elvis should be in the meeting with the FBI right now, but he isn't, because at 8 o'clock in the morning he received a call, a voice he didn't recognize, a calm voice, a voice that could have been talking about the weather. "Elvis, you have a decision to make. You can go to that meeting. You can talk to the feds. You can try to be the hero. And if you do that, you won't make it home alive. Your ex-wife Priscilla won't make it home alive. Your daughter, Lisa Marie, won't make it home alive. Or you can cancel the meeting, you can go back to work, you can do your shows, you can earn your money, and you can live a long and happy life. The choice is yours. You have 10 minutes to decide. And the call ends. Elvis is sitting on the bed, his hands shaking so much he can barely hold the phone. He thinks of his daughter. Lisa Marie is only 5 years old. 5 years old. Dark hair like his, a smile that lights up any room. She has nothing to do with this. She is innocent. And at that moment, Elvis understands something fundamental about evil. Evil has no rules. Evil has no honor. Evil hurts those you love to control you. And there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it if you are not willing to sacrifice everything. He cancels the meeting. He calls the FBI and says he made a mistake, that he has no information, that he was confused, that the drugs were messing with his head. And the agent on the other end of the line, tired, disappointed, says all right, and hangs up. And Elvis knows he just sold his soul. He knows he just gave up the only chance he had to free himself. He knows that now he belongs to them, forever. He cries. He cries like he hasn't cried since his mother died in 1958. He cries because he is the most famous man in the world and yet the most powerless. He cries because he understands now that fame doesn't protect you, money doesn't protect you, nothing protects you when you are on the wrong side of people who see no problem in shedding blood. That night, he goes on stage at the International Hilton. 2,000 people screaming his name. 2,000 people who love him. 2,000 people who paid good money to be there, to see him, to touch him if they are lucky. And he sings. He sings Suspicious Minds. He sings Burning Love. He sings Can't Help Falling in Love. And somewhere, in the middle of the performance, he looks toward the back of the showroom. And there, in the last row, where the light barely reaches, he sees a man in a dark suit. A man who is not applauding. A man who is just watching. And the man nods. A small nod. Almost imperceptible. A nod that says, "We know you made the right choice." A nod that says, "You belong to us now." A nod that says, "Welcome to the rest of your life."
The following years are a blur. Elvis continues performing in Las Vegas. 148 performances in 1973, 56 in 1974, 190 in 1975. He is physically destroyed. His weight climbs, his drug use increases, he starts forgetting lyrics on stage, he starts fainting between performances. Doctors tell him he needs to stop, that he needs rest. But he can't stop, because stopping means breaking the contract, and breaking the contract means returning to the attention of those people in the dark rooms. So he continues because that is the only thing he knows how to do. And Colonel Tom Parker, who is now millions in debt to the casinos because of his own gambling addiction, keeps pushing. Keep working, keep doing shows, keep generating money, because the Colonel needs the money not for Elvis, but to pay his own debts. Debts that, if unpaid, will result in his own end. And so both are trapped. The prisoner and the jailer, both slaves to the same corrupt system. 1977. Elvis is at Graceland. It's June. He should be resting. He should be with Lisa Marie, watching television, eating peanut butter and banana sandwiches, doing the normal things fathers do with their daughters. But he's not doing any of that. He's locked in the bathroom, reading, always reading, spiritual books, books about reincarnation, books about the afterlife, searching for answers, searching for meaning, searching for some way to make sense of what his life has become. And his body is giving up. His heart is enlarged, his liver is failing, his intestines are essentially paralyzed from the drugs. He weighs over 140 kilograms. He can barely climb the stairs without getting out of breath. He knows he is dying. Everyone around him knows he is dying. But no one does anything, because doing something means confronting the entire system. It means confronting Colonel Parker. It means confronting the contracts. It means confronting Las Vegas. It means confronting the Mafia. And no one is willing to do that. Not even for Elvis. Especially not for Elvis, because Elvis has become more valuable dead than alive. A martyr, a legend, a myth. And myths sell. Myths sell big.
August 16, 1977, 2:10 p.m. Ginger Alden, Elvis's girlfriend, wakes up in the giant bed of the Graceland Master Suite. She realizes Elvis is not beside her. She gets up, still sleepy, and walks to the bathroom. The door is closed. She knocks. Elvis. Silence. Elvis, honey. Silence. She opens the door and finds Elvis Aaron Presley collapsed on the floor, face down. The book he was reading, A Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus, open beside him. His eyes open, fixed, empty. She screams so loud the sound echoes through the mansion. The security guards come running. The ambulance is called. They attempt resuscitation, but it's too late. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, the man who changed music forever, the poor boy from Tupelo who conquered the world, is dead at 42 years old. The news explodes across the globe in minutes. Television stations interrupt regular programming. Radios play his songs non-stop. Millions of people cry around the world. And in Las Vegas, in a dark room of a casino, men in suits raise glasses of Scotch whiskey and toast. Because the problem is solved. The singer who knew too much. The singer who had a federal badge, the singer who could have spoken, will never speak now. Not officially, but there are whispers. There are always whispers. The doctors declare it a cardiac arrest. The official report says it was due to cardiac arrhythmia, possibly caused by the use of prescribed medications. The autopsy shows massive amounts of drugs in his system, codeine in a quantity 10 times higher than the therapeutic level, methaquavalone, diazepam, ethinomate, butalbital, and several other substances. Accidental overdose, they say. Medication abuse, they say. But those who know the truth, those who were there, those who saw Elvis's final years, ask different questions. How does such a watched man, so protected, so surrounded by people, end up alone in a bathroom with enough drugs to kill a horse? Who prescribed all these drugs? Dr. Nick, of course. The same Dr. Nick who was on the payroll not just of Elvis, but of several other people. People who had an interest in keeping Elvis medicated, keeping Elvis compliant, keeping Elvis working. And when he was no longer useful, when he became too problematic, too unstable, too dangerous, ensuring he didn't become a permanent problem. Coincidence? Perhaps. But in Las Vegas, where the Mafia controlled everything, where nothing happened without approval, where people disappeared in the desert and were never found, coincidences were rarely just coincidences.
At Elvis's funeral, more than 80,000 people crowded outside Graceland. Inside, only family and close friends. Priscilla was there, pale as a ghost, holding Lisa Marie, who cried, asking why Daddy wouldn't wake up. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, was devastated. The man who had gone to jail for stealing to feed his family would now bury his son, the son who had lifted them out of poverty,
the son who had become the most famous person on the planet. And Colonel Tom Parker? Colonel Tom Parker was there, in a black suit, inexpressive face. And the day after the funeral, you know what he did? He started selling Elvis merchandise, T-shirts, posters, records. He turned Elvis's death into a business, because to the Colonel, Elvis was never a person. Elvis was always a product. And now, dead, he was an even more valuable product. Colonel Tom Parker lived until 1997. He never admitted anything, never revealed his true deals, never explained where all the money Elvis generated went. When he died, he took his secrets with him. Secrets about contracts signed in dark rooms. Secrets about deals made with men whose names never appear in legal documents. Secrets about the true price of fame. So what really happened to Elvis Presley? The truth is, no one knows for sure. The official version is accidental overdose. But there are many unanswered questions. Why was such a rich man so cash poor when he died? Why were his contracts so unilateral, so favorable to the casinos, so detrimental to him? Why couldn't he perform anywhere else but Las Vegas after 1969? Why did Colonel Tom Parker, an illegal immigrant who could have been deported at any moment, have so much power over him? Why was Elvis so paranoid in his final years? Why did he carry so many guns? Why was he so scared? And most importantly, why, after he received that federal badge, after he started asking questions about money laundering in Las Vegas, did his health deteriorate so rapidly? Was it the drugs? Was it the stress? Was it the exhaustive work? Or was it something more deliberate, something more sinister, something that ensured the man who knew too much would never have the chance to speak? The FBI has a file on Elvis Presley. It's over 600 pages. Most of it is available to the public now thanks to the Freedom of Information Act. And you know what those pages show? They show that Elvis really was collaborating with the FBI. He really was providing information. Not much, not specific enough information to result in charges, but he was talking. He was identifying people. He was describing operations. And then, suddenly, in 1973, right after that Thursday we mentioned earlier, right after that threatening phone call, the communications stop. Elvis stops calling. Elvis stops providing information. Elvis goes silent. The FBI interprets this as a loss of interest. But what seems more likely? That Elvis, who was so enthusiastic about being a federal agent that he flew to Washington to meet the president, suddenly lost all interest? Or that he was silenced? That he was threatened, that they showed him exactly what would happen if he kept talking? The FBI file doesn't answer these questions, but the chronology speaks for itself.
Let's talk about the people who truly controlled Las Vegas in the 1970s. Meyer Lansky, the financial architect, died in 1983 in Miami Beach. He was never convicted for his Las Vegas-related crimes. He never spent a day in jail for money laundering. He died rich, powerful, and free. Mo Dalitz, the owner of the Desert Inn, died in 1989. He was also never jailed. He became a respected philanthropist in his final years, donated millions to hospitals and charities, received humanitarian awards. Polite society treated him as a legitimate businessman, not the gangster he truly was. Sam Giancana of the Chicago outfit was assassinated in 1975, shot 7 times in the mouth and neck in his own home. a classic Mafia hit that sends a message. He talked too much. And Dr. Nick, Elvis's doctor, he was prosecuted in 1980 for improperly prescribing drugs, but he was not convicted. In 1995, he lost his medical license, but he was never jailed, never faced real consequences. He lives on today, an old man who gives occasional interviews about Elvis, always maintaining that he was just trying to help, that he was doing the best he could, that Elvis's death was a tragedy he couldn't have foreseen. But those who lost loved ones to the overprescription of medications have different opinions. Graceland, Elvis's mansion, was turned into a museum in 1982. More than 500,000 people visit every year. They walk through the rooms where Elvis lived. They see his cars, his planes, his suits, his awards. They visit his tomb in the meditation garden, and they cry. They still cry, decades later, for a man they never met, but who seemed to know them through his songs. But what they don't see, what isn't on display, are the contracts, the threats, the fear, the invisible prison that was Elvis's life in his final years, because that is not the story they sell. The story they sell is of a king who lived fast and died young, of a talent that self-destructed, of a tragedy of excess. And perhaps part of that is true, but it is not the whole truth. The whole truth is darker, more complex, more frightening. The whole truth is that Elvis Presley was caught in a machine that devours people, a machine built by men without conscience and fueled by infinite greed. And when he tried to escape, when he tried to fight, the machine crushed him. Lisa Marie Presley, Elvis's daughter, grew up with the shadow of a father she barely knew. She was 9 when he died. 9 years of fragmented memories of a man who was at the same time the most loving father in the world when he was present, but who was absent so often, trapped in Las Vegas, trapped in his own prison of fame and fear. She inherited Graceland. She inherited the rights to Elvis's music. She became very rich, but the money did not fill the void. Money never fills the void when you lose a father too soon. She struggled with addictions. She had complicated relationships. She searched all her life to understand who her father truly was, beyond the legend. And in interviews over the years, she mentioned things about how her father was always worried, always anxious, always looking over his shoulder, always checking who was in the room, always paranoid. She didn't use the word threatened, but what else explains this behavior in a man who had everything? In February 2023, Lisa Marie Presley died from complications of bariatric surgery. She was 54 years old, another life cut short, another tragedy in the Presley family. And with her death, more memories were lost, more truths were buried. The only ones who really know what happened in those final years are dead, or they are not talking.
But there are clues. There are always clues. In 2010, declassified FBI documents revealed that the Mafia had plans to assassinate several informants in the early 1970s. The names were redacted, but the profiles match. Public figures, people with access, people who could cause significant damage if they talked. And the methods proposed? Make it look natural. Overdose, heart attack, accident. Anything but an obvious shooting that would attract federal investigation. The FBI took these plans seriously enough to document them, but not seriously enough to prevent them completely. Because at that time, in 1973, 1974, 1975, the FBI was much more focused on political movements, on anti-war protests, on civil rights groups, than on protecting singers in Las Vegas. Elvis was just another celebrity, just another drug addict, just another person who would probably kill himself anyway. Why waste resources? And so they didn't waste them, and Elvis died.
and no one was held responsible. And the Mafia continued operating in Las Vegas for another decade until finally, in the 1980s, corporations began buying the casinos, cleaning them up, making them legitimate. But for Elvis, that change came too late. Here's the thing about conspiracies. Most people think that conspiracies require secret meetings in smoke-filled rooms where villains plan malevolence. But the reality is much more mundane. The reality is that conspiracies happen through mutual interest. No one needs to give explicit orders. No one needs to sign documents saying, "Kill this person." All that needs to happen is for powerful people to share a common goal and for each one to do their small part. The doctor prescribes more drugs than he should. The manager pushes more shows than is safe. The security guards leave the artist alone when he shouldn't be alone. None of these individual actions is murder. But collectively they kill as efficiently as a bullet. And that's what happened to Elvis. No single person killed Elvis Presley. The system killed Elvis Presley. A system of exploitation, of control, of greed that viewed people as assets to be extracted until there was nothing left. And when he tried to resist, when he tried to fight, the system ensured he understood his place. And when he no longer accepted his place, when he became too problematic, the system eliminated him in the most discreet way possible. Years later, decades later, people who worked in Las Vegas at that time, people who are now old and retired, people who have nothing left to lose, occasionally let slip things in interviews. An ex-blackjack dealer mentions in an obscure podcast that everyone in the casinos knew that Elvis was protected, but that when you're protected by the Mafia, you are both protected and a prisoner. An ex-Hilton security guard says in an interview for a local newspaper that there were men who regularly showed up, men who weren't guests, weren't employees, but had total access. Men who entered Elvis's dressing room without knocking, men about whom no one asked questions. A former waitress who served Elvis several times mentions in her memoirs that he always seemed scared, even when he was smiling, even when he was singing. There was always that look in his eyes, the look of a cornered animal. These are not evidence, these are just stories. But when you put all the stories together, when you connect all the dots, a pattern emerges. And the pattern tells a different story from the official one. A darker story, a story no one wants to hear because it destroys the legend. But maybe it's time to destroy the legend. Because the legend does not do justice to the man. The man deserves the truth, even if the truth is ugly.
So what do we learn? We learn that fame is not protection. We learn that money is not freedom. We learn that when you enter certain worlds, when you accept help from certain people, when you sign contracts with clauses you don't fully understand, you might be selling much more than your talent. You might be selling your autonomy, your safety, your life. We learn that the entertainment world, especially in the 1960s and 1970s, was deeply intertwined with organized crime, and that artists, no matter how big, were pieces in a much larger game. We learn that people die. People die not always from bullets or poison, but from systematic neglect, from continued exploitation, from a system that breaks you down little by little until there is nothing left to break. And we learn that the truth is rarely simple. The truth is rarely satisfying. The truth rarely fits the neat narratives we want to believe. Was Elvis Presley an addict? Yes. Did Elvis Presley make bad decisions? Yes. Could Elvis Presley have saved himself if he had made different choices? Maybe. But it is also true that he was in a system designed to exploit him until his death. And when he tried to leave, when he tried to resist, the system ensured he couldn't. Here's the thing about conspiracies. Most people think that conspiracies require secret meetings in smoke-filled rooms where villains plan malevolence. But the reality is much more mundane. The reality is that conspiracies happen through mutual interest. No one needs to give explicit orders. No one needs to sign documents saying, "Kill this person."
All that needs to happen is for powerful people to share a common goal, and for each one to do their small part. The doctor prescribes more drugs than he should. The manager pushes more shows than is safe. The casino owners apply subtle pressure. The security guards leave the artist alone when he shouldn't be alone. None of these individual actions is murder. But collectively they kill as efficiently as a bullet. And that's what happened to Elvis. No single person killed Elvis Presley. The system killed Elvis Presley, a system of exploitation, of control, of greed that viewed people as assets to be extracted until there was nothing left. And when Elvis tried to resist, when he tried to be more than just a money generator, the system ensured he understood his place. And when he no longer accepted his place, when he became too problematic, the system eliminated him in the most discreet way possible.
And you know what the saddest part of all this is? It's that it didn't have to be this way. Elvis had enough talent to have a brilliant career without Las Vegas. He could have toured the world. He could have recorded new albums. He could have explored different musical genres. He could have become an even more respected artist in his maturity than he was in his youth. But Colonel Tom Parker didn't let him. The contracts didn't allow it. And behind the contracts, always were the men of Las Vegas. The men who didn't see art, who didn't see legacy, who saw only numbers on a spreadsheet. Elvis generated millions of dollars for the casinos of Las Vegas, hundreds of millions when you adjust for inflation. He filled showrooms every night. He brought tourists. He brought gamblers. He brought money. And in return, they destroyed him, slowly, methodically, completely. And when he was no longer useful, when his body was too broken, when his spirit was too exhausted, they let him die, and then profited from his death even more than they profited from his life. Today, Elvis Presley's estate is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Lisa Marie, before she died, had sold most of the rights to a corporation. Graceland continues to attract fans. His songs keep playing, his face keeps appearing on merchandise. Elvis became, in death, exactly what Colonel Tom Parker always wanted him to be. A brand, a product, an infinite source of revenue that doesn't complain, doesn't make demands, doesn't need to be fed or housed or protected. And the men who controlled him in life, the men who threatened him, the men who guaranteed his silence, they are all gone now too, dead or retired, living comfortably with money they earned through extortion, money laundering, and exploitation. None of them faced real justice. None of them paid for their crimes. Because that's how it works when you are powerful, when you have connections, when you know how to work the system. You don't pay. Other people pay. People like Elvis. People with talent and dreams and vulnerabilities that can be exploited. But here's the thing about the truth. The truth does not die when the people who know it die. The truth remains. The truth leaks out. The truth emerges in small pieces over decades until eventually, the full picture becomes clear. And the full picture of Elvis Presley is getting clearer every year. Not the myth, not the legend, but the man. The man who was incredibly talented and incredibly exploited. The man who loved his mother more than anything and who never fully recovered from her death. The man who desperately wanted to be more than just a singer, who wanted to serve his country, who wanted to make a difference, but who ended up being used by people who had no conscience. The man who, in his final years, was terrified, addicted, imprisoned, and who died alone in a bathroom at 42 years old, having achieved all the external markers of success, but feeling, deep down, like a total failure.
The story of Elvis and the Mafia is not just about Elvis. It's about how power structures work. It's about how vulnerable people are exploited by systems that are bigger than any individual. It's about how greed corrodes everything it touches. It's about how fame and fortune do not protect you from predators, but actually attract them. It's about how when you are truly in danger, when the people who should protect you are the people who pose the threat, there is nowhere to run. It's about how some prisons don't have bars. Some prisons are made of contracts and threats and fear and obligations you cannot break without destroying everything you love. And it's about how, in the end, we are all mortal. We all die, but some of us die free, having lived on our own terms, and some of us die still chained, still trapped, still belonging to forces that will never release us, not even in death. 47 years later, we are still talking about Elvis. We are still trying to understand what really happened. We are still asking questions that will probably never be fully answered. And perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps some stories are not meant to have clean conclusions. Perhaps some stories exist to remind us that the world is more complicated, more dangerous, darker than we want to admit. That real people suffer real consequences when corrupt systems are allowed to operate unchecked. That fame is not glamour. That success has prices that are not always visible. That sometimes the king is not in a castle. The king is in a cage. And the crown he wears is made of chains. Elvis Aaron Presley was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, in a house that was little more than a shack, to a family that had nothing but love and faith. He died at Graceland, a 23-room mansion, one of the most famous properties in America, surrounded by unimaginable wealth, but alone in a bathroom, his body ravaged by drugs, his spirit broken by years of exploitation and fear. He lived the American dream, and the American dream killed him. Or perhaps, more accurately, the people who monetized the American dream killed him. The people who saw in him not a human being with feelings and fears and needs, but a resource to be extracted. And when the resource ran out, when there was nothing left to take, they simply let him go. And they told the world it was his fault, that he killed himself, that his choices led him to that bathroom. And in part, perhaps that is true, but only in part. The bigger truth, the more important truth, the truth that needs to be told is that Elvis Presley was assassinated. Not with a gun, not with poison, but with systematic negligence, with continued exploitation, with subtle threats and absolute control, assassinated in a way power always assassinates. Slowly, invisibly, leaving the victims looking like accomplices in their own destruction.
And so we come to the end of this story. A story that began with a poor boy who had a dream of making music, a dream of making his mother proud, a dream of meaning something in a world that said people like him meant nothing. And he realized that dream beyond his wildest imagination. He became the king. But the kingdom he ruled was not really his. It was theirs. It was always theirs. And when he forgot that, when he thought that maybe, just maybe, he could be free, they reminded him with a cruelty that took from him not only his freedom, but eventually his life. This is not a happy ending story. This is not a story where good triumphs over evil. This is a story where a talented man, a good man at heart, a man who loved his family and loved his music was destroyed by a system that had no soul. And the only redemption, the only small light in this darkness, is that we are here, decades later, still telling his story, still remembering him, still refusing to accept the official narrative, still searching for the truth. Because Elvis Presley deserves the truth, even if the truth is painful, even if the truth is frightening, even if the truth destroys the myth and reveals the ugly reality beneath. He deserves that. Because in the end, he was not the king of rock and roll. He was just a man who was caught up in forces greater than himself, a man who fought the best way he knew how, a man who lost, but a man who, in his heart, was genuine, was real, was human. And that humanity, that vulnerability, that reality, beneath all the fame and all the tragedy, that is what truly matters. That is what we must remember. Not just the songs, not just the performances, but the man, the real man who lived and suffered and died too young, alone and scared, in a bathroom in Memphis, surrounded by everything and having nothing that truly mattered. Because some stories should not be forgotten. Some stories need to be told, no matter how uncomfortable they are. Some stories carry lessons that transcend the individual and speak about systems, about society, about how we treat the people who light up our lives with their talent. And the story of Elvis Presley, the real story, not the sanitized legend, not the commercialized myth, but the painful and complex truth of a man caught between his talent and the greed of those around him, that is a story that deserves to be told, deserves to be remembered, deserves to be passed on. Because as long as we remember, as long as we refuse to forget, as long as we keep asking questions and looking for answers, Elvis is not completely dead. His truth lives. And in truth, there is a dignity that was denied him in life, a dignity that we can give him now, the dignity of being seen, of being understood, of being recognized not as an untouchable icon, but as a human being who was exploited, threatened, and in the end destroyed by forces that should have been stopped but never were.
There is a moment in Elvis's career, right at the beginning, before everything got complicated, before fame became a prison, before the contracts and the threats and the fear. It's 1954. He's 19 years old. He's at Sun Records recording That's All Right. And Sam Phillips, the producer, notices something magical happening. He realizes that Elvis is creating something completely new, something that never existed before, a fusion of gospel and blues and country that is going to define an entire generation. And in that moment, in that small studio in Memphis, Elvis is free. He is pure. He is just a boy who loves music, making the music he loves without an agenda, without pressure, without fear. And if you listen to that recording, if you really listen, you can feel it. You can feel the joy, the freedom, the limitless possibility. And it's heartbreaking because you know how the story ends. You know that that free boy, that happy boy, is going to become a trapped man, a scared man, a man who is going to die alone in a bathroom 23 years later. And you want to scream across time. You want to warn him. You want to say, don't sign that contract. Don't trust those people. Don't go to Las Vegas. Keep your freedom. Keep your joy. Keep the purity you have now in this moment. But of course you can't. You can't change the past. You can only learn from it and hope that the next generations of artists, the next 19-year-old boys with impossible talents and infinite dreams, have what Elvis didn't have: protection, guidance, people around them who value their humanity more than their potential for profit. The music industry has changed enormously since the 1970s. There is more transparency. There is more advocacy. There are organizations that fight for artists' rights. There are lawyers who specialize in entertainment contracts and who can explain the fine print. There are therapists and addiction counselors who understand the unique pressures that artists face. There are movements for reform, for justice, for equity. And all of that is good. All of that is progress. But it's still not enough. There are still young artists signing contracts that tie them down for years to unfavorable terms. There are still exploitative managers. There are still record labels that see artists as disposable assets. There is still a culture of excess that glamorizes self-destruction. People are still dying. Maybe not literally threatened by the Mafia, maybe not living in fear of physical violence, but still being destroyed by a system that values production over well-being. And as long as that continues, the story of Elvis remains relevant, remains a warning, remains a mirror in which we can see our own collective failures.
So here is what I want you to take from this story. Don't just take the drama. Don't just take the tragedy. Don't just take another sad celebrity story. Take the understanding that fame and fortune do not make you invincible. In fact, they often make you more vulnerable, because the more you have to lose, the more control other people have over you. Take the understanding that contracts matter, that you must always fully understand what you are signing, that you must have independent representation, that you must never trust that someone, no matter how friendly they seem, has your best interests at heart just because they say they do. Take the understanding that when something feels wrong, when you feel trapped, when you feel threatened, you must speak up. Speak loud, speak publicly, because secrecy is the weapon that powerful people use to maintain control. And sunlight is the best disinfectant. Take the understanding that you cannot fight against systems of oppression alone. You need community. You need allies. You need a safety net. And Elvis had none of that. He had Colonel Tom Parker, who was part of the problem. He had his Memphis Mafia, who were loyal but powerless. He had fans who adored him but who had no idea what he was facing. And he had federal authorities who were interested in the information he could provide, but not interested enough to protect him when he needed it. And so he faced it alone, a man against the machine. And the machine won, as machines always win when an individual fights alone. But here's the thing about fighting machines. You can't win alone, but you can win collectively when there is transparency, when there is accountability, when there are witnesses willing to speak, when there is a society that cares enough to demand justice. And perhaps that is why it is so important to tell this story now, decades later, when all the main actors are dead and cannot retaliate. Because now we can speak freely. Now we can connect the dots. Now we can say out loud what was only whispered before. That Elvis Presley was a victim. That he was exploited. That he was threatened. That he was destroyed. And that the people responsible never face justice. And by saying this out loud, by refusing to accept the narrative that his death was simply the result of his own failures, we are doing something important. We are restoring agency to him. We are saying that he mattered, that his life had value beyond what he could generate in revenue, that he deserved protection, that he deserved justice, and that the fact that he received neither is a stain on all of us. There is a moment in Elvis's career, right at the beginning, before everything got complicated, before fame became a prison, before the contracts and the threats and the fear. It's 1954. He's 19 years old. He's at Sun Records recording That's All Right. And Sam Phillips, the producer, notices something magical happening. He realizes that Elvis is creating something completely new, something that never existed before, a fusion of gospel and blues and country that is going to define an entire generation. And in that moment, in that small studio in Memphis, Elvis is free. He is pure. He is just a boy who loves music, making the music he loves, without an agenda, without pressure, without fear. And if you listen to that recording, if you really listen, you can feel it. You can feel the joy, the freedom, the limitless possibility. And it's heartbreaking because you know how the story ends. You know that that free boy, that happy boy, is going to become a trapped man, a scared man, a man who is going to die alone in a bathroom 23 years later. And you want to scream across time. You want to warn him. You want to say, don't sign that contract. Don't trust those people. Don't go to Las Vegas. Keep your freedom. Keep your joy. Keep the purity you have now in this moment. But of course you can't. You can't change the past. You can only learn from it and hope that the next generations of artists, the next 19-year-old boys with impossible talents and infinite dreams, have what Elvis didn't have: protection, guidance, people around them who value their humanity more than their potential for profit.
The music industry has changed enormously since the 1970s. There is more transparency. There is more advocacy.
There are organizations that fight for artists' rights. There are lawyers who specialize in entertainment contracts and who can explain the fine print. There are therapists and addiction counselors who understand the unique pressures that artists face. There are movements for reform, for justice, for equity. And all of that is good. All of that is progress. But it's still not enough. There are still young artists signing contracts that tie them down for years to unfavorable terms. There are still exploitative managers. There are still record labels that see artists as disposable assets. There is still a culture of excess that glamorizes self-destruction. People are still dying. Maybe not literally threatened by the Mafia, maybe not living in fear of physical violence, but still being destroyed by a system that values production over well-being. And as long as that continues, the story of Elvis remains relevant, remains a warning, remains a mirror in which we can see our own collective failures. So here is what I want you to take from this story. Don't just take the drama. Don't just take the tragedy. Don't just take another sad celebrity story. Take the understanding that fame and fortune do not make you invincible. In fact, they often make you more vulnerable. Because the more you have to lose, the more control other people have over you. Take the understanding that contracts matter, that you must always fully understand what you are signing, that you must have independent representation, that you must never trust that someone, no matter how friendly they seem, has your best interest in mind just because they say they have them. Take the understanding that when something feels wrong, when you feel trapped, when you feel threatened, you must speak up, speak loud, speak publicly. Because secrecy is the weapon that powerful people use to maintain control, and sunlight is the best disinfectant. Take the understanding that you cannot fight against systems of oppression alone. You need community. You need allies. You need people who will support you even when it gets dangerous. And finally, take the understanding that every life has value, that artists are people, not products, that the entertainment they give us does not give us the right to their lives, that they deserve respect, deserve protection, deserve the freedom to say no, to stop when they are exhausted, to leave when they are in danger. And that when we fail to give them that, when we allow them to be exploited until death, that is a moral failure that we all share.
Elvis Aaron Presley should be alive today. He would be 89 years old. He could have been a statesman of music. He could have mentored young artists. He could have watched his daughter grow up. He could have met his grandchildren. He could have had decades of music still to make. But that was stolen from him. Stolen by a system that saw him as a revenue stream instead of a human being. Stolen by people who value dollars over dignity. Stolen by a culture that glamorizes excess and ignores pain. And when you think about all the unfulfilled potential, all the unwritten songs, all the performances not done, all the lives he could have touched if he had lived, it is devastating. It is a loss not just for his family, it is a loss for all of us, for culture, for art, for humanity. And the only way to honor that loss is to ensure that it means something, that it changes something, that it makes us better at protecting the artists who come next, at valuing people over profits, at building systems that nurture talent instead of exploiting it to destruction. Because in the end, that's what all great stories are about. Not about individuals, but about what they reveal about us as a society. And the story of Elvis reveals something deeply uncomfortable. It reveals that we are capable of loving artists while allowing their destruction, that we can celebrate their talent while ignoring their suffering, that we can turn them into icons while treating them as commodities, that our admiration is often superficial, more about what they do for us than about who they are. And that is a difficult truth to face, but facing it is necessary, because the alternative is to keep losing people, keep watching incredible talent be consumed by machines of exploitation, keep pretending surprise when yet another artist dies young, and then repeat the cycle, mourn, honor, commercialize their memory, and change absolutely nothing. Elvis deserved better. All artists deserve better. And we as an audience, as fans, as a society, have a responsibility to demand better, to not accept the narrative that artists who die young simply made bad choices, to look deeper, to ask harder questions, to hold systems accountable, not just individuals. Elvis's connection to the Mafia almost killed him. In fact, I argue that it really did kill him, just slowly. And the reason why this story matters is not for the drama, it's not for the conspiracy, it's because it perfectly illustrates how power works, how control structures operate, how vulnerabilities are exploited, how people are destroyed not by obvious villains with guns and explicit threats, although that certainly occurred, but by systems that normalize exploitation, that make exhaustion the expected price of fame, that treat addiction as inevitable instead of avoidable, that see self-destruction as a character flaw instead of a predictable result of unsustainable pressure. And as long as those systems exist, as long as we continue operating under those assumptions, we will continue losing people. We will continue having to tell stories like this. We will continue having to ask what we could have done differently, and the answer is always the same. We could have listened when they said they were tired. We could have believed when they said they were in danger. We could have valued their humanity over our entertainment. We could have built systems that protect instead of exploit. We could have done better. We can do better. We must do better.
This is the story of Elvis Presley and the Mafia, a story of talent and tragedy, of dreams realized and lives destroyed, of a boy from Tupelo who conquered the world and discovered that conquering the world means losing your soul, of a king who was not free, of a man who had everything and had nothing, of a life that shone brightly and faded too soon, of a death that was called an accident but was, in all the ways that matter, murder. Murder by negligence, murder by exploitation, murder by a system that values money over humanity. And the reason why we tell this story, the reason why we don't let it be forgotten, the reason why we keep asking questions decades later, is not for morbidity, it's not for sensationalism. It's because I believe profoundly that telling the truth about what happened to Elvis is a way to honor him, to give meaning to his death, to transform tragedy into a lesson, and to ensure that the artists who come after him, the dreamers, the talented, the vulnerable, have a better chance than he had, a chance to live their lives fully, to maintain their freedom, to realize their potential, to grow old, to be happy, to be free. Because that is what Elvis deserved. That is what every artist deserves. That is what every person deserves. And as long as we don't provide that, as long as we continue sacrificing people on the altar of fame and fortune, as long as we continue treating talent as a commodity to be extracted, the story of Elvis remains relevant, remains a warning, remains an accusation, and remains, above all, a reminder that behind every legend there is a person, and that this person, no matter how great their fame, no matter how immense their talent, is as fragile, as vulnerable, as worthy of protection and care as any of us. Elvis was the king of rock and roll. But before that, before the fame and the fortune and all the tragedy, he was just a boy who loved his mother and loved music and had a dream. And that boy, that pure and hopeful boy of 1954, deserved a better ending than dying alone, scared, and broken in a bathroom in 1977. He deserved to grow old, he deserved to find peace, he deserved to be free. And the fact that he had none of that is something that should haunt all of us. Because some stories should not be forgotten. Some stories carry truths that transcend the individual. And the story of Elvis Presley, in all its glory and all its tragedy, is one of those stories. A story about the price of fame. A story about the cost of dreams. A story about what happens when systems of exploitation are allowed to operate unchecked. A story about a man who had everything and lost everything. A story that ends with an avoidable death and a question we can never stop asking. How did we let this happen? And more importantly, how do we ensure it never happens again? Because some stories should not be forgotten. Some stories are more than entertainment. Some stories are warnings. They are lessons. They are calls to action. And the story of Elvis Presley and his dangerous connection to the Mafia, the connection that imprisoned him, terrorized him, and in the end contributed to his premature death, is one of those stories. A story that needs to be told, a story that needs to be remembered, a story that needs to change us. Because if we don't change, if we don't learn, if we don't do better, then Elvis died for nothing. And that, more than anything else, would be the greatest tragedy of all.